honestly, this movie scared me too much for me to make an opening making fun of it, because I'm pretty sure if I do something bad, it might happen to me. Because my PlayStation freaked out playing this movie, and it was really scary. And we're just not going to do it. Welcome back to 31 Days of Halloween. Today we're going to be talking about another exorcism movie called The Exorcism of Emily Rose. And whereas I was completely disappointed by The Exorcist, I was not disappointed at all by The Exorcism of Emily Rose. I wasn't too familiar with this movie. I remember when it came out, it was again like the whole Exorcist thing. I'm like, alright, I'm not watching that. I don't do exorcism movies. This is too scary. And a couple months ago, a friend recommended it to me. And I was like, I don't know. It's an exorcism movie. I don't really want to watch it. It's going to be too scary. So I never watched it. I have watched a couple other like lesser known exorcism movies, like the B grade list off of like Netflix or Amazon Prime, to kind of ease my way into the exorcism genre. And those weren't quite scary, but this one definitely was. So The Exorcism of Emily Rose is about this woman named Emily Rose, and she seems to get possessed by a demon while she's away at college. And when she comes home, trying to find help for it, the family enlists their church priest, Father Moore, and during the exorcism, Emily dies. Or during this whole process, Emily dies. So now, it's not just, the movie's not just about the exorcism. It's also about the trial of Father Moore and whether or not he's actually guilty of killing Emily, because they charge him with negligent homicide. So negligent homicide is different from murder or like regular homicide, because it's saying like you didn't intend to kill this person. There was no maliciousness, there was no intent, but through your negligence or your lack of getting this person care, or providing adequate support, this person died. So he's looking at several years in prison, and he refuses to take a plea deal because his whole thing throughout the movie is Emily's story must be told. And the way the movie opens is, you start basically like in the middle, sort of end. In the middle of the movie, but sort of the end of The Exorcism, where a coroner comes in and is like, yeah, she didn't die of natural causes, and then they arrest the priest, and we proceed from there. So what I really liked about this movie is that it's not just a straight exorcism movie. It's not just like, okay, we have this person who's possessed, let's watch them do scary things, while the priest and their family attempts to exorcise them and get rid of this evil spirit that's inside of them. The whole story of Emily's supposed possession and her exorcism are told through flashbacks from the court proceedings. So you get like current day stuff, and then of the characters, so the Father Moore's attorney, the prosecutor, and then like when they're in court and they start to tell the story, we'll flash back to what part of that story was happening with Emily. And I really like this because you have almost two separate stories here, because there's a whole like side story going on with Father Moore's attorney, who's kind of struggling with her own sense of religion and her own job, because she's known for getting really bad people off of death row. And then we're also dealing with Father Moore's current predicament with the Catholic Church, and how, they're like, you need to just do whatever you can to keep us out of the spotlight, and if you're not going to keep us out of the spotlight, we're basically going to abandon you. And then we go back to seeing scenes of Emily Rose, who's played amazingly by Jennifer Carpenter. Um, I'm not like, I've seen her in a couple things, but not a ton of stuff. And I don't understand why she's not in more stuff after her performance in this movie, because it is absolutely fantastic. She's so evocative, and just you feel everything in her performance. Um, when you find out that there's very little CGI effects done in this movie, and you kind of realize it part of the way through. And even the scenes where she does like the weird contortions and stuff that you usually see like exorcism that you usually see in like these exorcism movies, that's pretty much all Jennifer. They had made up like dolls to like be on screen for the contortions, but the director decided that Jennifer did them so well and so creepily that he was like, yeah, we're not going to use the dolls, we're just going to use Jennifer Carpenter, and she's just going to do it. So her performance is just amazing. Like, watch it just for her performance. But we go through this trial learning about what happened to Jennifer, and the prosecution is basically trying to say that Jennifer wasn't actually possessed. She was suffering first from seizures, and then these seizures developed into psychotic epileptic seizure disorder. I believe that's the term. And it's actually a real thing. A lot of times during this movie, I was pausing it and saying, this can't be a real thing. Like, they must just be making this up for the movie to kind of make it sound good and this and that. But a lot of the stuff that they talk about in the movie is real stuff. And some of it's a little embellished. But they're basically trying to make a compelling and very real argument that she wasn't actually possessed. And it's so cool how they go through this, because in the old days it was like if somebody was suffering from, and by old days I mean like in the 1400s and earlier, and probably up until like the early 1800s, especially like when you look at Salem and the witch trials in the 1600s, if someone was suffering from a mental illness, which can present a lot like being possessed, where they may speak weirdly or have different personalities or have religious persecution ideas, people would think they were possessed and they would perform exorcisms on them. But obviously an exorcism isn't going to work on someone who's just suffering from mental illness and not an actual demon possession. So I thought it was really cool how they're basically doing what the Catholic Church does now, or what any church does now when they're trying to perform an exorcism, and rule out all physical and mental ailments. And you see that her school and her doctors and her psychiatrists were all trying to rule out these ailments, and giving her meds and stuff, and it was supposedly just getting worse. And that's the argument that the defense is making, that yeah, sure, she was getting all this help and this medication, but she was still like feeling like she was being attacked by demons. And I just love it. Like, it makes you think, like it makes you think where a regular exorcism movie doesn't. Because like I said, a regular exorcism movie is just straightforward. This person's possessed. We know they're possessed. Let's just exorcise them, and we're going to show as much scary stuff as we possibly can, and as much gross stuff as we possibly can, to really emphasize like how horrible demon possession is. Whereas in this movie, you don't see a lot of like gore or like gross behaviors. There's no vomit. There's very little blood. It's more focused on Jennifer's fear and the fear of the people around her as she continues to deteriorate and weird stuff continues to happen around her. So you sit there and wonder, you know, you're kind of being played along. You're part of the jury essentially in this movie. Is Father Moore guilty of negligent homicide because she really was suffering from medical and mental ailments? Or was her death just part of this exorcism and they just weren't able to overcome the strength of these demons that wound up taking that wound up possibly taking Jennifer's life? So I I can't recommend this movie enough. I gave this an 8, like a really strong 8, probably maybe even a 9. My friend gave it an 8, and it's weird because this movie doesn't do well with critics, and it didn't do well with general viewership. IMDb gives it a 6.7. On Rotten Tomatoes, the critics give it a 40, and general viewership gives it a 66, which is in line with IMDb. And despite like looking up reviews online, I couldn't really find like why people didn't like it. Um, or I couldn't find reasons that really made sense, at least to me. Like some people said that they didn't like how it bounced between the flashbacks to the trial procedure. They didn't feel that it was enough like an exorcism movie. Um, they thought that the acting wasn't good, which that's just flat wrong. I mean, Jennifer does overshadow everybody with her performance, but that doesn't mean that the performances from the other characters isn't good. I don't understand why this movie is rated so low. Like it's rated like middle of the pack, but from what I've seen with the other movies that I've been watching through this process and other movies that I've seen prior to this process, this is a really good horror movie in general, a good exorcism movie. Um, and it's one that makes you think. Maybe people just don't want to think. I don't know. But coming from my background where I studied psychology, it just it hits on like a lot of really good notes for me there. It hits on a lot of really good notes for me in the criminal justice realm. And then it just hit on a lot of good notes for me as far as being a tense movie and being a scary movie. Like I was legitimately affected by this movie after the fact, not just because I was thinking about it so much like, okay, well, was it a possession? Was it not a possession? But um like just being scared, like because it made it so real, and the characters were scared, and Jennifer's performance was just scary. So I really like this movie. I don't understand the dislike for it. The only thing that was a little frustrating for me was in the very beginning when the coroner comes and they're talking to Father Moore. Father Moore happens to look out of a window, and in the barn that's on this family's property, he sees like something go into the barn. It's like just this kind of like black flash of material or something, and I can't think of them ever saying what that was. So I don't know if it's just supposed to be up to interpretation to us, or if I just completely missed something in the movie. Because I've even tried Googling it, like, what did Father Moore see at the beginning of the movie go into the barn? And I can't find anything. So if someone has an answer for me, drop that in the comments because I'd really like to know. But that's really the only frustrating thing that happened in the movie, or the only thing that I didn't like. And obviously it doesn't affect my score because it was just, it bothers me. Like it's kind of like a thorn stuck in my brain right now. But it doesn't affect the movie for me, where I'm going to give it a less of a review because the rest of it was just so good. So if you haven't seen this movie, I highly recommend going to see it. I hope it scares you. I hope it makes you think. So we are going to be going into spoilers. So if you haven't seen this, go watch it. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and share. And I will hopefully see you in the next video. And we are moving into spoilers. So by the end of the movie, I keep talking about, was she really possessed or was she not possessed? I genuinely am not sure. It makes a compelling argument is made for both sides. And I like how they ended it where the jury finds the priest guilty. And I didn't even watch that part. I closed my eyes because I always watch movies with subtitles just so I can make sure I hear everything. And sometimes like they put the subtitles up in blocks of text, so I didn't want to know like before it was said out loud what he was. And they're like guilty, and like I opened my eyes, I'm like, oh my god, like they legitimately believe that he killed this girl or he was negligently responsible for her death. And then as Judge Brewster's trying to like talk to him about his sentencing, this and that, the jury's like, hey, we have a recommendation. Like, yes, we found him guilty, but you should give him time served and basically just let him free. And it's like, oh my god, like, so you think he's guilty, but you also like don't think he's guilty. So that's why you want time served. Or maybe it's like a sort of religious thing, like, you know, we think he did the wrong thing. We feel a moral obligation to say that like he did something wrong, but like he's also a priest trying to do what's best for this girl who maybe had been possessed in our opinion, or maybe we're just so freaked out by it that like we think that like I just loved it. Like what was going through the jury's head, or what would, I mean it's a fake jury, but like what would have been going through a jury's head in a situation like this? Because as much as the defense puts up a good the defense puts up a good argument with the expert witnesses that they bring and the tape recorder that talks that is a recording of the possession. The prosecution brings up a lot of good points too, where they're like, well, you know, they're saying that she had two voices, but Tibetan monks practice with two sets of vocal cords to make it sound like they have two voices, which, by the way, isn't actually completely true. Yes, we do have two sets of vocal cords, and I think they're called folds. You have like your primary and then your false folds or something like that. But your second false folds or the second set can't actually make human voice sounds. They kind of just make like other weird sounds. Um, so I guess instead of I don't even know like what it would sound like. But you don't really ever hear Tibetan monks talking in two different voices. You just hear them singing in different voices, which is what they use their vocal cords for. And that takes years and years of training, which Jennifer obviously didn't have at this point, seeing as she was only, I think, 19. And then they talk about, like, you know, the defense is like, oh, she had this stigmata on her hands to kind of prove that she had this vision of the Virgin Mary and she was supposed to suffer, and you know the stigmata is supposed to be you were touched by God. And the prosecutor was like, yeah, it's not stigmata, she just happened to grab a barbed wire fence and that's why she had the holes in her hands. So really good compelling arguments are made for both sides, and I think that's why it sticks with me so much, because it's like, which side is real? And it's kind of like a real life thing too. If you've ever read like stories of um, exorcisms or stories of haunted houses and stuff, there's always two sides here where it's like, here's what these people are saying who believe that this supernatural event happened, and then here's what we're saying logically and reasonably would have happened. The only problem is sometimes there is no logical, reasonable explanation for some of this stuff, or sometimes those are a real stretch, whereas the supernatural answer is the more reasonable answer. So I think that's why this movie stuck with me so much, because it really it makes you think, and I really like movies that make you think, even if it's like pretend. Um, so yeah, that was The Exorcism of Emily Rose. So thanks guys for coming and watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you have watched The Exorcism of Emily Rose and that you really liked it, or even liked it a little bit. And I will see you guys in the next video.